Welcome to Roby's workshop. As you recall last episode, we were putting in face frames for the upper cabinets. I told you we would put in the face frames for the lower cabinets off script, and they're in place and they look great. Today we're focusing on the inset drawer faces. Now, those face frames that I put in, I'd give myself a C- on those, but we're going to turn that C- into an A+ with these drawer fronts. Come on inside, let me show you how this is going to work. Office space. Drawers and pulls. Well, this is a good place to start, and before I go too much farther, my 3D printer is doing some meanwhile work, so just put up with the sound. We'll get there. Now, all of our drawer faces are going to be inset. Now, that inset is a problem if you have a flat panel framing into a flat face frame. The gap around the perimeter is going to be critical. You've got to get that right. And you could be off by a 32nd of an inch and you'll see it from across the room because the eye picks up on those details. Now, let's get to why I'm a C- here. What did I do right? Every one of these rails right there is a consistent height apart all the way across. That's good. The width of these drawers varies. It varies especially with the corner cupboard because that was a very difficult face frame to do, and each one of these rails right here was pieced in after the fact. Second, this panel right here, we had some issues with that as well because this exterior frame didn't always marry up just right. So in this particular face frame, we have to measure the widths of each one of these 8 drawer faces independently. We need to be able to do that quickly, and we need to be able to fix the issue, cut them to the right width quickly as well. Now that'll get us 90% of the way there, but what I want to do, I want to use a technique using a bead around the perimeter to soften the gap. You'll still see it, it still needs to be right, but if there is a much smaller deviation, it won't be quite as apparent. So that's the plan. Let's get out in the shop and I'll show you how we implement that. Before we get started, I want to talk about materials. Our drawer faces right here, we're going to make those out of plywood. It is so much quicker to work with plywood than it is otherwise. Now the perimeter right here, that is solid wood, and we have a lot of milling to get this bead in place. So we have one dimension I told you we could run with, and that's the width. These right here, we can get pretty close on those, but we have to stay a little bit long. Now this is a rabbet around the perimeter, so you can already see what our first tasks are going to be. First task is to cut to width, and we'll use the track saw to rough it out. We'll move to the table saw where we can clean up one side. We'll reset the fence to the final width, turn the piece around, and get that clean edge on the other side. Our drawer blanks are cut to height. The width is going to come later, as will the rabbets that the moldings fit in. Now, if you look at my sample right here, and I have been whittling on it a little bit, the bead detail, this top bead is actually proud of this surface. I think I want the flats proud of the surface too. I think that will be a better look. It'll look more like a picture frame. So, speaking of the moldings, I have a sample right here, and this is my bead on top, flat each side, and we are parallel in this dimension. So, that being said, let's get over to the router table and workbench, and I'll show you how we achieve good dimensional control on a molding like this. This pile of wood is actually scrap, but it's perfect for what we want it for. I want a straight, even face at 90 degrees, and to do that, I need to mark both sides of the flat right at the corner. That way, I know if I've got a complete joint on the board. We'll pass it through the jointer as many times as it takes to make the lines disappear. Once that's done, we'll know it is flat and square. My beading bit is in the router table. This flat right here is even with the bottom. This plate here and this plate here are parallel or even with this bearing right here, and that'll make for a good cut. Maintaining pressure against the fence is critical. If you come off the fence, the bead will be shallow and you're going to have to recut it again. That's why I have 2 hold down stops there. It's actually more important to maintain vertical pressure down on the table. If the piece rises vertically, the bead will be destroyed in that location. The actual molding is only about 3/8 of an inch wide. Maintaining pressure against the fence on such a small piece is a little difficult. That's where my rollers really help. It would be hard to get that piece uniform across the entire length. And when you get close to that blade, you have to have a push stick. Even with all that trouble, I did cut it wide, and I cut it wide on purpose. That allows me to go to the planer where I can take every piece of molding after I've cut it, and now I can dimension all of them to a very, very uniform width. Well, this is one of my drawer blanks, and I want to point out first off, I have marked this D2-1. So I have a similar marking right here, D2/1, and I have an arrow pointing up, and because I've marked this right here, I know it goes in this way. Now, we're measuring for these cuts right here. These cuts are fine, they're what I want. They're what I want because I know this is the right height, and I cut them to this dimension, and it's the right height across this full bay. So when I put it in this way, I am very, very tight right there. I don't need to cut that side. But when I put it in on this side, I have a 32nd of an inch, maybe even less than that, right up on top here. That's my gap. So we'll take it and we'll put it back in this way. And with a pencil behind, we will mark this on the back side. And on the miter saw, I will try to get as close to that as I can. I have a 1/16 of an inch shim on the fence right there, and that's what gives me my angle. Now the laser lines up with the line, and that's how I know I'm right. If you don't have a laser on your saw, it's not the end of the world, but I'll be honest with you, they do help. Well, I don't mind telling you, the compound miter saw was a little hard on my veneer, but that's not a matter, because in this technique, I'm going to put a rabbet around all 4 sides. Now I have my sacrificial fence here in the saw, and I have my dado stack, and my moldings are a whisper proud of what that is. They need to be a little bit proud because I don't want to see the plywood from the back after I install these. Now, it's easy enough to see how we can go this way and this way, but with the sacrificial fence, you can put the end up here, and you can put a push block, and you can move through the blade. We go away from the blade if it goes this way. If it goes this way, we're also away from the blade. So no matter if you move this way or this way, you're pulling away from the blade. But do take it slow, good even pressure, and just move through the cut. Well, our rabbets are cut, and I've got all my moldings cut and ready to go. You might think we get over here to the compound miter saw and just start cutting, and we are. But we've got something to think about first. One is I want to talk about a cumulative error. And there's a way to really solve that on a compound miter saw. I'm set at 45 degrees right here. And now I'm set at 45 degrees again. There's an indexing plate here at the bottom. That comes from the factory. That's a single item. It's made in one piece, and it is extremely accurate. And that's where it ends. Everything else is put together with nuts and bolts. If somebody dropped the box at the store, styrofoam's going to protect it. Ordinarily, everything be fine. You've got a lot of people putting this thing together. Cumulative error can be a real problem. So when I put this at 45 degrees right here, is it at 45 degrees? It's not perfect. It's not perfect. But the angle between this 45 and that 45 is 90 degrees. It just is. So how do you let the saw cancel all this out to give you, as you march around a square, get perfect miters? You keep the same side of the molding against the fence at all times. You don't turn it around to make a better cut. That will actually double the error that's built into the saw, and you don't want to do that. If you will just say, this is the outside, and the outside always goes against the fence, any error built into the saw will cancel itself out by the time you get all the way around your frame. Now, we have a little bit of error built into our drawer fronts because we are matching the face frames. And I will argue that a little bit of error in this miter is less important than the overall shadow line across this whole piece right here. That's what we're trying to avoid. So keep the error as low as you can where you can. My molding is in the saw with the back of the molding the outside against the fence, and I'll make my first cut. We'll take our piece and put it on our drawer and line up that freshly cut miter against the corner. Then we'll move over to the other side, take a pencil, and make our mark where we want to make our second cut. My molding is back in the saw with the outside of the molding against the fence. I've moved the blade 90 degrees, and I make the second cut using the laser to help me make that cut accurately. Once all 4 pieces are done, take the time to test fit it. You can go ahead and either cut a new piece or trim an old one back, but this is an important step. You can't do it after the glue's applied. Well, the moldings are all cut for both drawers, and they look really good. By the way, there are only 2 drawers. I'm using these first 2 to develop the procedure for the rest of the project, and you're seeing it in real time. So far, I've had no missteps. Things are going pretty well, but I almost had one. I was thinking about taking this drawer right here, getting up my pen nailer and just putting them in place, but I would have never been able to get to that surface right there to sand it if I'd done that. Now this plywood is in pretty good shape. I'm going to start with 180, take it to 220. I think I can get a good surface on it with just that level of sanding. Now these right here, I've got sharp corners on the front and side. I want to keep those. I don't want to sand those down, but I do want to take some 220 and I want to rub the top of this bead just to take a little of that burr off to make it smooth. I think that's all we're going to need. Well, my glue up clamping mechanism is pretty simple. I'm gonna take my drawer face right here and just put it in place. Now it's sitting on top of a 1/4 inch piece of plywood. That gets the whole thing to rise up just a touch higher. And I want that because that will center the pressure on these cauls right here. Now recall, this thickness right here is just a hair thicker than the edge of this plywood drawer face. So when we put pressure on this, we really are putting pressure on our strips. So we will put these in place, and of course, then we clamp up this way. These edge pieces go in at the same time. We've got 2 more cauls that will come right here, and this clamp right here will go on top. We'll give it about 30 minutes in the clamps, and then we'll start the next one. We'll put it aside for a good 4 to 5 hours before we do any manipulation with it after that. Well, I'm centered in the hole and I've got a nice reveal line all the way around. This bead is just proud of the face, and that is really what I wanted. And it married up very nicely with the plywood. When this is stained, you won't be able to tell the difference between the two. And that's what I'm going after. However, there were a few issues. If I pull this out here, I have a little bit of a gap right here. This has caused me to change my clamping arrangement. Let's go over to the bench and I'll show you what we've changed. Well, closing this gap actually increases another problem we had. I had some glue squeeze out on this edge and I was actually gluing to my cauls. Separation was a bit of a problem. I left a set of these in the clamps overnight. So we're not going to do that again, and we're also going to have to put a lot more pressure down on this. And the problem with putting that pressure on it, especially with this very thin bottom piece, is getting uniform pressure there is a problem. This little strip on the plywood, it's not going to support anything. So we have to put something underneath it that will support something. So we're going with a piece of plywood that's 1/4 inch thick to a piece of pine that's 3/4 inches thick. Now all that sounds good, except now I have moved everything up. So now what I'm looking at, all my cauls that put pressure this way have to have a base put on them, and that raises them up a bit. Second, you see these right here. Those are important because when I put this in place, I'm going to be putting some clamps right through here, 6 of them. Thought about doing 4, but I think 6 is better. So we will be putting in this arrangement a lot like this. And when we do that, we need something fairly sturdy on top to come in so that we can come in like this and give it a good clamp up. So we've got pressure this way, and now we're pressing down. So all 4 beads are pressed against the plywood. On the sides, I've had to take these, I had to raise them a little bit. And I did take the time to make them a little wider, so it's a tighter fit. Now as we go to deeper drawers, these will have to be cut again. Everything else I've got here is usable. So I've got my clamps right here, all those are set in place, and I still have enough room to get this one in place there. This is the rig that we're moving forward with. The revised clamping procedure worked very, very well. Everything is very tight. I like the way this came out. Now, we do have some squeeze out here, and we're going to use our oscillating belt sander to get rid of that. One note, this table is not perpendicular to the deck. I have it at a slight angle. I'm going to focus my sanding on the bottom here. We need to keep away from this top edge. It's sharp, and if we sand this back again, it'll be visible a lot farther away than you might think. So we will sand down this area right here. Any sanding on this top bead or top edge, that's going to be hand sanding. We need to take that really careful. I've taken some time, I've measured the width of this drawer, and I have set the fence accordingly. We will be drilling right down the center. Additionally, I've measured the width and found the center here. Our drawer pulls right here are 3 inches apart from the supports. So it's a relatively simple matter to mark these 2 lines here once we find the center. Now on the other side right here, I put a piece of sacrificial material. I don't want blowout when we drill through on the other side. Once your fence is set, all you have to do is hit your marks. The drill bit is a hair larger than the screw that mounts the pull. You really don't want to fight that when you're trying to install these. Well, these came out great. The drawer fronts are all done. These holes are very centered, and all of these fit very nicely in their openings. I have already tested them. Now, I remember I said I was going to put these aside and we'd move on to another project. I was not going to attach them until it was time to put on a coat of stain and finish. Well, I've changed my mind on that for a couple of reasons. Anytime you put something away to store it, inevitably it gets damaged. Also, to pull this drawer that is already inset into a face frame is difficult. I'm finding it difficult to use the drawer space that I have. So we are going to go ahead and install these. Come on over into the study. Let me show you how we're going to do that. The first step in this process is to secure the drawer in the opening. We'll do that with a couple of shims and make sure everything's good and tight. To make sure it stays put, we'll use 2 1-inch brads from the inside of the drawer to make sure it stays put. Using the existing holes in the drawer front, we'll go ahead and drill out the holes in the drawer itself. Between the 2 brads and the 2 screws for the drawer pull, I feel comfortable opening the drawer. I don't think it's going to move at this point. Now it's a simple matter of just installing the pull. And now the final bit. We close the drawer. Well, that about wraps it up for the top tier. At this point, I think you can see where we're going with this. the look on these inset drawers is really, really good. And if you just take some time to measure, you can do the same thing now that you've seen me do it. Now, we've got 2 more levels to do here. The next level of 11 drawers, those are the same width. And then the bottom 2 are the same width. So the last level is 22 drawers. That's going to be a big deal. We're going to do all those off camera. Now, after that, the next project we do on camera is probably the doors to the cabinet. I haven't decided if we're going to do 2 or 1. Most likely it's going to be 1, but that's a big door, and that's going to be interesting to see. So if you've been here this long, give me a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time in Roby's workshop.